Are you one of those people liking NVIDIA?
So obviously there's a lot of noise and it's great with what's happening in the AI space, especially the generative AI space. I think I like the term iPhone moment, but for us at Pictet Asset Management, we look at that more as I guess the space where all these startups are working in, right? It's when the iPhone started and you had all these new web applications that developed. But I think there are some bigger stories around generative AI that we like a lot, and obviously starting with the semiconductor space. NVIDIA is a good example of a lot of presentations that we've seen.
How do you feel about it, and what do you make of chatbots?
So I think it's a game changer for a lot of business models, not necessarily the obvious search engines that we see. So search engine, obviously there's a lot of discussions around the new ones coming up, whether it's GPT-4, whether it's Ernie, whether it's obviously what Google is already doing. But there's high barriers to entry when you think about it. You need very large data sets, but you also need a very huge investment and a very powerful cloud to do that. So as a result, I think it's an interesting space, but it touches very few players. Yesterday, I saw that Google, for example, search only lost like virtually no users. They have about 4 trillion searches a day. They have 4 billion searches a day, and they have 3 trillion kind of searches every year. That hasn't moved the needle yet. So I think there's still like a little bit more time to come before we can evaluate which ones are really good at search. But because of the high barriers to entry and having such a big cloud that you need to have as a prerequisite, I think there are other use cases that can be quite interesting, which are more working on improving small efficiencies, increasing productivity, and maybe even kind of reducing costs. So, I mean, if I take like cloud call centers, for example, we've seen some recent examples that were really interesting where you just reduce 10% of the kind of call center's workflow just by using a proper generative AI business model. I think semiconductor, like you mentioned, it's a great space to be in, but there are probably maybe 2 players at the moment that are very interesting, including NVIDIA, but it's leading edge,
would it be a little too early as well, ahead of or before the real commercialization of things like ChatGPT?
Yeah, so that's a very good point. Monetization of like even search or any business model related to generative AI is still very early stage, and maybe the market is probably overestimating expectations, whereas we're looking at long term, which is very underestimated right now. Monetization, obviously, with Google search is very clear, and it's a solid business model. But for the other incumbents, I think there's still a lot of proof to come out of. Having said that, it is a game changer in the sense that I don't know if you remember when people were still on-prem, or the business models were still on-prem, and those that took a long time to become cloud native were really left behind. And I think this is the same thing that we see right now in software, is that if you're not ready to have a generative AI business model, I think you could be left behind, your multiples can compress, and you could possibly sort of lose some market share, right? But what's emerging at the moment is still very early stage, and it looks like it's more linked to search. But we think, I mean, semiconductors, obviously semiconductors equipment makers, also very interesting. And then obviously the cloud space, whether it's hyperscalers, but also whether it's the software themselves. But really the focus is on generating, like you said, monetization, but through efficiencies. Initially, I think it's not going to replace a lot of jobs right away, but off the bat, it can make you much more efficient at work.